How do you disinherit someone without creating a mess for everyone else to deal with? Welcome to Let's Talk Estate Planning. I'm Jim Miskell. Today, we're going to talk about disinheritance. What to know before you disinherit someone from your will or your trust. There's a nice way to do it. There's kind of an ugly way to do it. We're going to talk about reasons that you might want to disinherit a family member. Sometimes it's just estrangement. Sometimes it's bad behavior. Sometimes it's a disagreement. Sometimes they're just not very nice. Sometimes you may have a beneficiary, a child or somebody who doesn't need it. They're wealthy in their own right, so they don't need an inheritance. So that's one reason. So we're going to talk about various reasons to do that. We're also going to talk about some misconceptions or some myths surrounding it, how no contest clauses work, and how a lot of people tend to not really understand the mechanism there. And so it can lead to some kind of unexpected consequences if you don't understand how they work. We're going to talk about this idea that you got to leave them $1 or it won't work, that sort of thing. Not true, but we're going to talk about why and where that comes from. We'll talk about how to avoid unintended consequences. Basically, you want to create how to get to the desired place you want without causing a big mess for the family to deal with. And then finally, I'm going to give you the secret. How to avoid being disinherited. You may not be the person making the plan. You may be a beneficiary, or you think you are. How to make sure you maintain that status as a beneficiary. My name's Jim Miskell, and you have joined Let's Talk Estate Planning. It's the podcast dedicated to the proposition that I dream of a world where everyone's got their estate planning. And as a result, when grief, crisis, and transitions strike, families get to do what families should do, and that's spend time with one another, supporting each other, rather than hassling over various administrative tasks that you could have taken care of ahead of time. I've been a practicing attorney in the state of Georgia for more than 3 decades, and despite that, the podcast is not legal advice. Legal advice happens when you have a one-on-one relationship with an attorney and you're paying them to think about your situation and give you the best legal advice based on what the statutes are and what you want to achieve. That only happens in that situation where you've created that relationship and paid them. Lawyers, you know, the joke is you ask a lawyer any question and they're going to give you the same answer. It's a 2-word answer. It depends. Lawyers don't say it depends for fun. They say it because it really depends. And that's the reason lawyers start asking questions, is they're not also inherently curious, although they may be. They're really trying to get the details that are necessary to tell you what the law is going to do in your situation. So all that to say that Let's Talk Estate Planning, the podcast, is here for informational and educational purposes, hopefully a little bit of entertainment, but it does not constitute legal advice. That's my disclaimer. And now we'll get back to disinheriting folks without causing a major hassle for the family. Let's Talk Estate Planning, available wherever you get your podcasts, and you can check us out on YouTube as well. Today's episode, as many of them do, come from conversations that I had with clients or prospective clients. In this case, it was Sylvia and her daughter, Tricia, came by. Actually, it was Tara, her daughter, that came by with her. Tricia was the subject of the conversation. Sylvia started out by just saying, look, I want to disinherit Tricia. I want to take her out of, this happened to be a will and trust plan. I want to take her out of the trust. She should inherit nothing. And there's just the 2 daughters, and you would think Tara would be kind of pleased with this. Quite to the contrary. She was saying, Mom, please don't do this. Please don't do this. Let me tell you a little bit more about what was going on in the family. Tara had moved from out of state a couple, 3 years ago to move in with Sylvia. Sylvia, a great lady, great mental state, great physical shape. She's 93 now, and Tara had come to move in with her because it had gotten to the point where, although she's pretty self-sufficient and pretty sharp, the family just didn't feel like it was safe for her to continue to live alone, but she wanted to stay where she was. And it was possible for Tara to relocate her job and come come to the Atlanta area to be with her. Until she did that, Tricia had been helping out with a lot of things Mom needed, but Tricia also has her own family, has kids she's raising and those sorts of things, and doesn't have quite as much time to spend. That's why Tara said, I'll come and kind of take over the primary functions with Mom. Well, Mom, as a result of this, said, well, Tara gave up her life and this, that, and the other thing, and sort of going to make her a beneficiary of the home. The plan up to that point had been completely equal. And Tricia learned of the change that Mom made, and she got mad. She didn't like that, and they had a fight. And Tricia and Sylvia had it out, and Sylvia felt like Tricia was unreasonable and brusque with her, and has not contacted her since, and neither has Tricia contacted Sylvia, her mom. So that's since last summer. Brings us to the conversation where Sylvia's in my office saying, I want to take her out. She's not paying any attention to me. I want to get her out. And you're going to hear more about this idea of not paying attention to somebody a little later in this conversation. But for Sylvia, it was just time to take her out. Tara, although she stood to inherit everything that Tricia was not going to inherit, because it's a pretty straightforward plan that went all to the two girls, said, Mom, don't do this. And her reasoning was, Tricia's going to be so unhappy, and she's going to cause such a stink, she'll never give it up. She'll always hear about it. This is going to spoil their relationship going forward. And it might even motivate Tricia to litigation over the terms of the estate plan. And Sylvia said, well, I don't care. She doesn't deserve anything because she's not paying any attention to me. And Tara rightly said, well, up until 2 years ago, she helped you a lot. And I know you're not getting along now, but please just leave things the way they are so that she gets a sizable point. And Sylvia said, well, look, I've got a no contest clause in here, so that should make it easy. We'll just, she can't sue. Hey, Jim Miskell here. Sorry to interrupt the episode. Hope you're enjoying today's content. A lot of times when folks are thinking about this kind of thing, questions spring to mind. If you have questions, we like to do some question and answer episodes. So you can go to our website, letstalkestateplanning.com, and shoot us a message and say, hey, on the podcast, I'd like Jim to cover this on the next question and answer session. Or if it's hitting closer home, especially if you're a Georgia resident, of course, we can't give legal advice on the podcast because it's not specific for your situation. But if you got a situation that you need to handle, it's important to get that done. So letstalkestateplanning.com is how to contact the office. I'd love to talk with you about the specifics of your situation and make sure your estate plan is everything that your family should have it be. In the meantime, we're going to go back to the episode. Thanks for tuning in, and I hope to talk to you soon. So this brings us to the mechanism of the no contest clause and how it works. No contest clauses, pretty much by and large, they'll say anyone who challenges the provisions of my estate plan, well, then they don't get what I've said they get. And if you think about what Sylvia wanted to do, she wanted to give 0 to Tricia. Well, what's this? The no contest clause says if you challenge it and lose, you don't get what I was going to give you. Well, she's not getting anything, so she's got nothing to lose. So the idea of this no contest clause, sort of making it ironclad where people can't sue, that part's a fantasy. Anybody can sue anybody for anything. What the no contest clause does is it says, I've given you something in the trust or in the will, in the estate plan, and you risk that by challenging to say Mom didn't have capacity or her will was bent by somebody else to go do this thing. Therefore, it should be thrown out. The only way a no contest clause works is that if there's a bequest, a gift of sufficient amount that somebody feels like they wouldn't want to risk it. That's what the no contest clause does. It says, why don't you just take what I've given you? It's not maybe everything you wanted, but it's not worth risking either. So Tara was onto this. She said, Mom, that's not going to work. And we worked through a lot of these issues with the family to kind of come up with a solution where Sylvie could express what was on her mind without making things just a nightmare for both daughters later. And that's the line to sort of walk with this idea of giving somebody less than they would normally expect to get, less than they would under the code, or less than they expect. And the reasons for this can range pretty widely. I've had some families where somebody's just disappeared. Sometimes there's a mental health or a substance abuse issue that causes people to kind of go off the grid. I've had family members who had somebody get involved in a religious or a similar kind of situation that isolates them. Some families characterize that as involvement in a cult. I don't know whether it is or not. I don't know enough about these situations, but I do know that the report of my client is that they become estranged. They no longer have a relationship. Sometimes one of the reasons is that I don't like something they did. They did this terrible thing. They had an argument with me. They argued with me. They were brusque with me. We had this disagreement. They're just not very nice. They're not respectful. I raised them to be better than this, and they're not. They're disrespectful to me, and so I want to take them out of it. And those are all variations of something having to do with that beneficiary's behavior. And so the idea that usually this disinheritance can be used kind of in a punitive way to punish them for acting in a way that the person making the plan doesn't like. The other reason that comes up from time to time is sometimes one of the kids is an elite surgeon or has done extraordinarily well in business. And I've had a lot of families who have had a particularly successful child turn to them and say, you know what, we've been blessed in my family, and I don't need anything. I appreciate that you're probably going to make this equal between my brothers and sisters. I don't need any more in the way of assets than I've got. Please let that benefit my brother and sister. And so that sometimes is a motivation for that. And that's a little bit different than the other reasons we talked about, because the other reasons usually result in hurt feelings. When folks are just saying, I don't need it, please give it to the others, that's not going to cause a problem. When it comes to misunderstandings, well, we just talked about no contest clauses, that they don't work unless they've got skin in the game. Unless that beneficiary has something they stand to lose, a no contest clause doesn't work. Sort of related to that, a lot of times I'll hear folks say, yeah, I want to give them $1. I know that you have to give them $1 if you want to disinherit them. Well, that's not really true either. But it comes from a valid train of thought, is that what you don't want to do is just omit somebody in your plan, somebody who's a natural beneficiary, an heir under law. And again, every state has a schedule of it. In the Georgia Code, we've got a schedule of heirs. And heirs are, of course, as we talked about many times, those designated by the code in Georgia or statutory scheme wherever you are, who inherit if there isn't a valid estate plan. A valid estate plan, you get to pick your beneficiaries and whatever amount they get. The default, though, you can kind of think of it that way, the default is what's in the statutory code. And if you're going to leave somebody less than they inherit under the statutory code, that's probably less than they expect. And the idea, this germ of an idea of leaving them $1, leaving somebody $1 isn't necessary, but what it does say to anybody who reads the will is, I thought about Bob when I was making this thing. I'm leaving Bob $1. It's like leaving a nickel tip. I mean, it is certainly an insult, but it says, I noticed, and you're only getting the $1. So giving this bequest of a small amount isn't necessary, but it is best practice if you're going to make distributions that differ from what the statutory scheme provides, that you mention that you were doing that intentionally. It wasn't just a case of you forgot to mention Bob. It's you're doing this for a deliberate reason. The language can be friendly or it can be unfriendly. And I tell people all the time, if you want to call somebody a dirty dog, we can do it. I don't recommend it, but you can do it. And you can list all the grievances you've got and why you're doing this thing. And that falls under that category of the punitive disinheritance. And you make it very clear. Another reason for disinheritance that I didn't really touch on is lifetime provision. What do I mean by that? I mean, sometimes one of the kids needs more help than the other. And the parents have gotten in there and they may have paid for rehab, they may have paid for extra school, they might have helped them out with a down payment for a house. Sometimes it's after a divorce. All kinds of reasons. Sometimes there's difficulty getting through school or a period of unemployment, and the parents step in, and they do that because they want to do that. But very often my clients who have provided more for one child than another will come back and try and equalize that with the estate plan. So although the estate plan on its face appears to be unequal, what the parents are actually trying to do is true things up based on their conduct during their lives as they deal with that child having made them a greater beneficiary lifetime. So very often it's good to put a statement in there. You say, we're making a larger provision for Beth and Sue because we helped Bob so much during life. And again, that doesn't have to be ugly. It's just explaining the circumstances. What can happen, though, when you do this, and Tara, who was in my office with Sylvia, was right on the money with this. Mom, it's going to be a nightmare here. When I talk with clients about avoiding that sort of situation, the response may be, what do I care? I'll be dead. Let the kids fight it out. Fine, totally legitimate. Not usually the way we're approaching estate planning, though, because remember, one of the main objectives for most families is you want to make it easier for the folks after you're gone rather than more difficult. Communication is really the best way to head off a big argument later. And I tell my clients all the time, if you're going to make a smaller gift to somebody or disinherit somebody outright, tell them now. The clients don't like this advice. Let them be mad at you now rather than taking it out on their sibling later. And that's what Tara was sensitive to here. Tara knew that her sister Tricia was going to be mad as a hornet if Mom went through with this disinheritance of cutting her out. And when she looked around after Mom died, she'd have nobody punished left but her sister. And she knew her sister well enough to know that that's probably how things were going to go. And so I urge clients all the time, tell your kids, tell your beneficiaries, be mad at me. Don't be mad at the other beneficiaries because it was my decision, not theirs. That's tough for a lot of people. And a lot of times families that are going to consider disinheritance for one of those negative reasons that we talked about, that's a very difficult thing to do, to communicate. There are a lot of reasons for disinheritance. A lot of them are negative. Some of them are positive because people are doing really well, or they've said, please spread that generosity to others, which sort of brings us around to, well, now, if you're in a position where you think you're going to be a beneficiary, how are you going to avoid this situation of being disinherited? And I talk to my clients about this on the other side as the ones who are passing these gifts on, and the advice is the same. Call up your family member. Call her up. Call your mom. Call your dad. Call your aunt. They're looking to hear from you. They can get lonely. The clients that ask me to disinherit beneficiaries, very often it's reflected by hurt feelings. It's reflected by feeling lonely and neglected. So the best advice I can give for everybody out there is call your family up. They're looking to hear from you. They'd like to talk to you. It's a good thing. If there has been an argument, some sort of disagreement or falling out, mend the fences. People only live so long, they don't live forever. Don't let them die with that argument still on the table, unresolved. If you can't mend the fences, if it's a disagreement you're just not going to get over, find some common ground. Don't talk about that thing. This is the same advice I give beneficiaries that I give my clients. Look, you love them. They're your kids. You don't want to disinherit them. What you really want to do is mend fences if possible. It's not always possible, and it certainly often is not easy. It's much better to go through a little bit of pain now to try and reconstitute a relationship than go to the extent to disinherit somebody or to find yourself disinherited in a will. That's just a symptom and a result of a breakdown in the family relationships. And estate planning so often is all about relationships and trying to preserve relationships. And good estate planning can't make a family happy and healthy and functional. But what good estate planning does is it avoids giving families another reason to argue when transitions occur. So this conversation about disinheritance. If you're getting ready to disinherit somebody, you can sure do it. And you can say everything you want to say, not just through your actions, but also in what you say about it in the documents, why you're doing it and what they've done to make you want to do this thing. You can praise behavior. You can tell why you're proud of some kids and ashamed of others. You can put it all in there for writing for everybody to see. But it's going to be there. But it may not be necessary to go to those lengths. And whenever possible, I urge my clients and the families I work with to come up with a solution that avoids that drastic measure. So that's today's conversation about disinheritance. Communication is really the key. Communication now to repair relationships. You won't have the opportunity after you die. You won't have the opportunity once you become disabled to repair those relationships. Likewise, if you've got a family member that you need to do some work with, you won't be able to do that after they die. You won't be able to do that after they become disabled. Unfortunately, if you get in a situation where disinheritance is the right answer, it's important to document that in the plan. Make sure that it's clear. You can be as detailed with the reasons as you need to. Sometimes less is more. Communicate that disinheritance, that unequal treatment now. Let the people who are being disinherited be mad at you instead of mad at the other beneficiaries. Because very often this will cause hurt feelings. And you know that. So the best way to do it is to rip the Band-Aid off now while you're still alive. Let's talk estate planning. It's a podcast dedicated to my dream that everyone has their estate plan in place so that as grief and transition occurs, families have less to argue about and less administrative hassle to go through. My name is Jim Miskell, and I'm so glad you spent some time with me on this episode of the podcast, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Until then, take care.